In the winter of 1867, a small Alaskan village received a visitor. She wasn't carried in. She wasn't born there. She simply appeared, barefoot in the snow, eyes open wide, not a single tear on her face. She spoke only 12 words in her life. But every one of them came true. They gave her a name. Anya. She gave them nightmares. Each time she slept, the snow deepened. Each time she spoke, someone vanished. And one night, she whispered just one word. Barry. By morning, the entire village was gone, buried under a blizzard that never should have happened. And that was just the beginning. Welcome to Behind the Genius, where we uncover the forgotten minds, strange cases, and terrifying stories that history tried to bury. Some mysteries are too strange to explain. Some people, too dangerous to remember. In this story, we go deep into the frozen north, into a case that was never written in science books, never taught in schools, and never spoken of again. A little girl with no past. Dreams that predicted death. And a storm that wiped everything away. If you're drawn to hidden truths and minds that defy logic, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and join us as we reveal what the world chose to forget. Because sometimes the most chilling minds come from the cold. If this story sent a chill down your spine, imagine what else history tried to hide. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to Behind the Genius for more forgotten cases, terrifying minds, and true stories science refused to explain. Candle, leave a comment if you've heard whispers of similar cases. We read everything. Repeat button. Share this with someone who thinks they've seen everything they haven't. Because this is just one of many minds the world tried to bury in silence. And we're just getting started. The year was 1867. The ground in northern Alaska had already frozen solid by early September, locking the land in silence. Snowfall came early that year, heavier than usual. The kind of snow that blanketed entire cabins, muffled every sound, and blurred the line between land and sky. In the remote village of Nagsralik, a cluster of wooden huts surrounded by forests and icy rivers, the locals were used to harsh winters. They believed they had seen it all. Until she appeared. No one saw her arrive. There were no footsteps in the snow, no travelers coming in or out. She was simply found one morning, sitting silently on the edge of the forest, barefoot in the snow. Her skin was pale, almost blue from the cold, but she was alive. Her eyes were open, wide, and unblinking. And she wasn't crying. Just staring straight ahead as if waiting for something. A hunter named Mako was the first to spot her. At first, he thought she was a doll someone had lost, maybe carved from ivory. But when he stepped closer, she turned her head toward him, slowly, like she had heard his thoughts. He would later say that her eyes were the clearest blue he had ever seen. Not just clear but empty. As if they were never meant to hold a soul. The villagers were cautious. They didn't take in strangers easily, especially in winter. But there was something about the girl, something that made people lower their guard. She couldn't speak, or maybe she chose not to. She only nodded or stared. When they asked her name, she didn't answer. So they gave her one, Anya. It meant grace in the tongue of the old women who still remembered the Russian priests. They brought her inside one of the huts, warmed her by the fire, wrapped her in furs. She didn't resist. She barely moved. She just watched the flames dance and blinked only when the wind howled hard enough to shake the cabin walls. For days she remained like this. No crying. No laughing. No questions. It was as if she didn't know how to be a child at all. Then the dreams began. It started with the dogs. One morning, Anya woke before sunrise and pointed to the east, where the forest line met the sky. Minutes later, the village sled dogs began howling and barking, scratching at their leashes. 2 of them broke free and vanished into the woods. The villagers searched all day. That night, they returned with blood-stained harnesses and no dogs. The next day, Anya stared at the ceiling, unmoving for hours. When the village elder came to check on her, she finally whispered a word. Only one. Fall. No one knew what she meant. That afternoon, one of the children playing by the frozen riverbank fell through a weak patch of ice. He was rescued but barely breathing. They asked Anya how she knew. She didn't answer. Each day after that, the pattern continued. A dream. A word. A disaster. And each time, the villagers began to believe her warnings were not accidents. She saw things before they happened. And the more they believed, the more they feared her. They kept her warm. They fed her. But no one sat near her anymore. The children stopped playing outside. People whispered when she walked by. Even Mako, who had first found her, kept his distance. One night the dreams changed. That evening the sky was clear. The stars sharp. Anya lay by the fire, eyes wide open, breathing slowly. Then without warning she sat up straight. Her hands trembled. She whispered a new word louder this time. Bury. The elder sitting nearby asked, Who? Who will be buried? Anya didn't reply. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed into sleep. The next morning snow began to fall. But it wasn't like before. It didn't stop. For 3 days and 3 nights, it poured from the sky like sand from a broken hourglass. The villagers were trapped in their homes. Roofs creaked under the weight. Chimneys froze. Food began to run low. When they finally dug their way out, the landscape had changed. Entire cabins were gone. The river was lost beneath 20 feet of snow. And Anya? She was gone. Her bed untouched, her furs still warm. They searched the village, then the woods. But she was never found. No footprints. No body. Nothing but snow. Years later, elders would still whisper about the girl in the storm. Some said she was a warning. Others thought she was the storm. But all agreed on one thing. Anya never spoke without reason. And she never dreamed twice. 3 weeks had passed since Anya vanished into the storm. Nagsralik had returned to an uneasy calm, though nothing felt normal. The snow had stopped falling, but its mark was everywhere. Trees lay snapped like twigs. Paths once familiar were erased. And in the center of it all stood the cabin where Anya had stayed, untouched by the blizzard, not a single flake on its roof. The villagers avoided it. Even the dogs refused to go near. But the silence was beginning to crack. It started with dreams, not Anya's this time but the villagers. Several people reported the same strange visions, standing alone in a vast, white field while a distant voice called their name. Always from beneath the snow. Always in Anya's voice. These dreams ended the same way, a rush of wind, a shattering sound and sudden, breathless cold. Mako, the hunter who had first found her, tried to ignore them. He'd seen enough death to know what fear does to the mind. But one night, he woke to find his cabin door wide open. Snow hadn't blown in. Instead, it had stopped right at the threshold like something had held it back. At his feet lay a single birch leaf, impossible for the season, and burned into it a single word, remember. The next day, strange marks began to appear in the snow outside each home. Circular patterns like someone dragging fingers in perfect spirals. The villagers blamed the wind. But one elder, a blind woman named Sura, called it something else, a summoning. She said she hadn't felt this kind of cold since she was a child. The old cold, she whispered, the kind that listens. That night, the villagers held a meeting inside the old gathering hall. It had been years since all of them gathered like this, and the air was thick with unease. Sura, seated by the fire, spoke of a legend older than even the Russian priests. A tale of a girl born during a sunless winter, who could speak to the wind, dream of the sky and walk where no tracks followed. She comes when the balance tips, Sura rasped. When too much grief freezes the land. Not a child, not a spirit. A vessel. The villagers dismissed her words as stories meant to scare children. But just as the meeting ended, the flames in the hearth flared blue. The room went cold. And in the silence that followed, every person heard it, just once, a whisper that slid across the wood like breath. Below. Panic spread. Some wanted to leave the village. But there was nowhere to go. Snow blocked the trails for miles. Mako and 2 others ventured to the frozen riverbank the next morning, hoping to find the source of the whispers. What they found was worse. Near the spot where the boy had once fallen through, the snow had melted into a perfect circle. The ice beneath was glass clear, and under it they saw her. Anya. Eyes closed. Arms crossed. Peaceful. But she wasn't frozen. She was breathing. Slowly. As if sleeping under the ice. Mako fell backward, shaking. The others stared, frozen in fear. One tried to chip at the ice with a hatchet, but the blade shattered like glass. A gust of wind knocked them off their feet. And when they looked again, Anya was gone. The ice unbroken. The water still. They said nothing to the village. That night, Mako returned to the old cabin. Alone. He sat where Anya had once sat. Waited. And when the wind howled through the cracks, he thought he heard her voice again, closer this time. One word. Soon. But there was more. 3 days later, the postman arrived, a rugged man from the coast named Halvorsen. He came only once a month, bringing supplies and messages. But this time he brought something else. A parcel wrapped in sealskin, sent from Sitka, addressed not to anyone in the village, but to the sleeping girl. The villagers refused to touch it. Mako took it to his cabin and unwrapped it alone. Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with unfamiliar symbols, diagrams and rough sketches of snow-covered villages. On the last page was a simple drawing. Anya standing alone in the storm, her hair floating like smoke. And below it, written in perfect Russian. She dreams what the earth remembers. Mako brought the journal to Sura. She ran her fingers across the pages, feeling the indents. Her face turned pale. "These aren't drawings," she whispered. "They're maps." "Maps to what?" Mako asked. She looked toward the window where the snow had begun falling again. To where she came from. Or where she's going next. The days that followed were colder than any the villagers remembered. Not just by temperature but in feeling, a chill that settled into their bones even beside a fire. The wind no longer howled, it whispered. It hissed through cracks in the wood, crept beneath blankets, and carried with it voices too soft to understand but too clear to dismiss. The village of Nagsralik no longer felt like home. It felt like a place being watched. Mako didn't sleep much anymore. He stayed up reading the strange journal that had arrived for Anya, its pages filled with symbols and maps that shifted the longer you stared. Some nights, he thought he could hear the pages move on their own. The ink smelled faintly of ash. And sometimes, when he turned a page, the fire beside him would dim as if the book itself drank the light. Sura, the old blind woman, warned him not to read aloud. "Some knowledge is borrowed from places that don't lend twice," she said. But it was too late. Mako had already begun to change. He spoke less, stared more. He no longer asked if Anya was real. He only wondered how. One morning the river cracked. It was loud enough to wake the entire village. It sounded like a tree being split by lightning. But when the people rushed outside, the river was still, frozen. And there, standing at its center, was a shape. A girl. Not moving. Not shivering. But she wasn't Anya. Her hair was darker. Her face older. And her eyes, black as the sky in midwinter. She stood barefoot on the ice, wearing a torn wool dress soaked in frost. No one approached. No one could. That evening, the dogs chewed through their leashes and vanished again. Fires refused to stay lit. The elder who had once rescued the drowned boy began shouting in his sleep, speaking in a language no one recognized. When he woke, his eyes had turned milky white. He never spoke again. Then the snowmen appeared. Children noticed them first. Figures built in silence, always outside someone's window. Their arms made of blackened birch. Their heads too small. No footprints around them. No one claimed to build them. And every morning they stood closer. The villagers began sleeping in shifts. Doors were barricaded. But still the snowmen came. And each had a new feature. Teeth carved from bone, buttons of river stone that weren't from any local shore, and sometimes, eyes. Real eyes. Mako and Sura agreed something had been invited here. Not summoned, not exactly. It had followed the dreamer. Or perhaps been released through her. The journal, they believed, held the key. But many of its pages were missing. Torn out. That's when they remembered the reindeer hunter. Weeks earlier, just before Anya had arrived, a stranger had passed through Nagsralik. A tall man wrapped in thick fur and silence. He didn't trade, didn't speak. Just passed through, heading north toward the glacier line. He stayed only one night and left behind a small pouch of salt and a bundle wrapped in bark. Inside that bundle had been a page. Mako still had it, folded inside his jacket. He took it out now and placed it beside the journal. It fit perfectly. On it, a drawing, a storm with a face, and beneath it, a single sentence in the same neat Russian. The girl is not the end. She is the beginning of what the land forgot. The silence that settled over Nagsralik was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every whisper of wind felt intentional, every shadow deliberate. After the appearance of the second girl, dark-eyed and motionless on the ice, the village's fear thickened into paranoia. No one went outside alone. No one lit fires after dark. And still the snow never stopped. It was Sura who first said it. The glacier is breathing again. Few knew what she meant, but all listened. In her youth, Sura had spoken of an ancient spirit said to dwell within the largest glacier north of the hunting grounds. Tussarak, they called it. A sleeping force older than the cold itself, buried under centuries of frozen silence. The last time the glacier breathed, 3 villages vanished without a trace. Now it was stirring again. The frozen river that ran alongside Nagsralik had changed. Strange cracks ran along its surface, circular, spiraling patterns unlike any caused by nature. Mako began carving them into wood, trying to understand their meaning. He said they weren't cracks at all but symbols. Runes. Warnings. One night, as the wind whistled in strange tones through the eaves of every cabin, Mako had a dream. In it, he saw Anya walking barefoot across the ice, her eyes wide and unblinking, toward a massive mouth carved into the side of the glacier. It was not a dream like the others. This one felt real. When he awoke, his feet were soaked. Snow lay melted around his bed. He took it as a sign. By morning, a small group had gathered. Mako, Sura, and 2 younger villagers who still believed Anya could be saved. They would follow the signs north toward the glacier, toward whatever truth awaited in the white silence. They packed little. Most supplies had frozen or spoiled. The trek was brutal. Winds howled so loud they could barely hear each other speak. The deeper they walked into the white, the more the land seemed to shift. Trees curved away from them. The snow beneath their feet grew warm, then cold again. On the 3rd night they saw the lights. A strange glow flickered beneath the ice, as though stars had fallen and been trapped below the surface. The group camped near a frozen ridge. That night, Mako opened the journal and found a new page had appeared, one none of them had seen before. On it, a drawing of the glacier's mouth, jagged ice shaped like teeth, and in its center, Anya's face. Not smiling. Not crying. Just waiting. The entrance to the glacier's mouth stood like a frozen cathedral, towering pillars of translucent ice, jagged and smooth in equal measure. The wind died as Mako and his small group crossed its threshold. For the first time in weeks, silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that listens back. The tunnel descended gradually at first, a slippery decline of ice so clear it looked like glass. Their lanterns flickered against its mirrored walls, throwing back their reflections, though sometimes the reflections didn't match. In one, Mako's reflection turned and walked the other way. In another, Sura's mouth moved as if whispering a secret she hadn't spoken aloud. No one said anything. They just kept moving. They marked the path with charcoal symbols, though the marks would vanish behind them without sound. It was Sura who noticed it first. There was no echo in the glacier. No sound bounced back. Everything they said or did was swallowed whole. After several hours of descent, they reached a cavern. It was immense. Columns of ancient ice rose like trees. At its center stood something impossible, a stone altar half buried in frost, inscribed with more of the spiral symbols. Laid across it, perfectly still, was Anya. Her eyes were closed. Her hands crossed over her chest. But her skin looked warm, alive, as if she had just fallen asleep. Mako stepped forward, but Sura stopped him. "She's dreaming," she said. "If you wake her before it's done, the storm won't stop. It will become her." That's when the whispers began. First one voice, then many. Not from behind, not from above, but inside their own thoughts. Each member of the group dropped to their knees, clutching their heads. The whispers weren't speaking in any known language, but the meanings were clear. This place was not made for humans. It had waited long enough. It was remembering now. Suddenly the glacier groaned. The floor beneath them shifted. The altar began to sink. Mako, desperate, shouted Anya's name for the first time in days. Her eyes snapped open. But they were no longer blue. Anya's eyes glowed silver where once they had been blue, casting reflections on the icy walls around the altar. Her body did not move, but her voice echoed in their minds. Not words, images, memories. The group saw flashes of her childhood, the day she first felt the storm whisper her name, the moment the snow asked her to listen. Then darker things, visions of a blizzard that devoured not just villages but time itself. Mako stumbled back, eyes wide. Sura whispered prayers through cracked lips, though she no longer believed in any god that ruled this place. "She's not dreaming," Mako said. "She is the dream." The whispers turned into wails. From the walls of the glacier, faces began to appear, frozen expressions of pain and longing, people swallowed by past storms. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Their mouths moved but no sound escaped. It was as if the ice itself had memory, and it was remembering all at once. The altar cracked. Anya's body began to rise, lifted not by any force they could see, but by the storm itself, now surging through the tunnels, no longer outside. Her mouth opened, and the storm screamed. They weren't alone anymore. A flood of cold wind swept down the corridor, and the walls began to pulse with light. Mako felt his breath freeze midair. Shapes moved just beyond the glow, figures wrapped in old hides, their skin pale, their eyes missing. These weren't spirits. They were what came after the storm. Sura fell to her knees, overcome. She whispered the old names, the ones her grandmother had told her never to speak. Names of wind spirits and frost demons, older than memory. Her voice cracked and the names turned to dust. The glacier shuddered again. The mouth began to close. Mako had only moments to decide. He stepped forward and reached for Anya's hand, though every instinct screamed at him to run. The moment their skin touched, the world inverted. He saw it all. Centuries of storms, lives swallowed in snow, the glacier born from sorrow. The dream had never been hers alone. It was inherited, passed on. And now he was part of it. He collapsed, unconscious. When Mako awoke, he was alone. The others were gone. No footprints in the snow. No sound. Only the slow hum of breath from the ice beneath him. He was outside again, back in the forest near Nagsralik. But they were different. Trees blackened by frost, the air heavy with silence. And in the sky above, no stars. Only clouds shaped like faces. He stumbled back to the village, which had changed entirely. The homes were still there but rearranged, as if a child had toyed with their positions and forgotten to put them back. A small girl stood in the center of the village, her back to him. "Anya?" he whispered. She turned, but it wasn't her. Her eyes were empty, her skin smooth as porcelain. She opened her mouth and snow poured out. The villagers had not survived. They had been rewritten. He found the journal beneath a frozen bench. Pages moved on their own, scribbling as if by invisible hands. One page read, "You dreamed the storm, now you must wake it. Or become it." He remembered the legends, the lake below the mountain where the old fire still lived. A warmth untouched by time. Maybe it was the last sanctuary. Maybe it was a trap. But he had no choice. The storm began again. The lake had once been sacred. A place where elders came to pray in spring, when the ice thawed just enough to show the water below. Now it was a crater steaming with unnatural heat. The storm circled above it but could not touch it. Not yet. Mako walked onto the ice. Each step cracked the surface. He carried nothing but the journal. The wind whispered around him. Not in Anya's voice now, but his own. He reached the center of the lake and began to carve the final spiral. The storm screamed. Lightning crackled. The glacier roared. Then silence. The ice gave way. He fell. Beneath the surface, time stopped. He floated in a void of memory, faces he had seen, words he had spoken, fears he had buried. He was alone, yet surrounded. He heard Sura's voice far away. She was calling him back. But he knew the truth. The storm needed a vessel. Someone who knew its name. Someone who remembered. And he did. He placed the journal on the altar beneath the lake. Firestones lit. The runes pulsed. The dream was sealed. Above, the wind died. The village was saved. But Mako never returned. Sometimes children say they hear footsteps in the snow, though no one's there. Sometimes dreams come filled with spirals. And sometimes the wind whispers not Anya's name, but his. Because the storm is not gone. It's just watching. And so the storm sleeps once more, but not forever. If this story made your skin crawl or stirred your curiosity, subscribe to Behind the Genius, where the forgotten, the unsolved, and the terrifying are always just one story away. Don't forget to like, comment, and share if you felt the chill of Alaska's haunting past. And remember, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some dreams are warnings. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, stay behind the genius.